Good afternoon. I'm Anab Jain. I'm the co-founder of Superflux, one of the 500 creative businesses, artists, and makers based at Somerset House. I'm here on the behalf of Somerset House and a representative of the resident community of artists and creative enterprises to welcome you and to welcome Sir John Major to share his views on Brexit, the single issue that is the biggest concern to everyone here in the room. After my brief introduction, we'll hear from Sir John, and then John Campner, Chief Executive of the Creative Industries Federation, will conduct a Q&A. If you'd like to tweet, please include at creative_fed and at Somerset House, and you can use hashtags Brexit and Fed event. This is an appropriate venue in many ways. This architectural masterpiece, for most of its life, was government offices. Though from the beginning, part of the building was a place of learning and debate, including the first home of the Royal Academy of the Arts, where today Courtauld Gallery and the Institute is based. In the 1990s, under Sir John Major's government, an enlightened plan was hatched to hand this over to the specially created Somerset House Trust and turn it into a cultural centre for the nation. So thank you, Sir John. Today, Somerset House is home to what is probably London and the UK's largest community of creative organisations. Freelancers, artists, makers and thinkers. A vibrant centre for contemporary culture, offering a diverse and dynamic public programme of contemporary arts and culture, which attracts 3.5 million visitors annually. Somerset House sits in the city of Westminster, not only the centre of political life in the country, but its creative centre as well, with 8% of UK's creative industry jobs in the many world-class museums and performing arts, film, advertising, and television companies in this borough. This event, organized by the Creative Industries Federation, the national organisation for all the UK's creative industries, cultural education and arts, Tech London Advocates, a private sector-led coalition of tech leaders, experts and investors uniting to form the most influential independent sector group in the country, and Somerset House. So we are here to talk about Brexit and its potential impact on the creative industries. The headlines are that the creative industries are the fastest growing sector of the UK economy, worth £91.8 billion, more than the automotive, oil and gas, aerospace and life sciences industries combined. The creative industries have succeeded because of UK's ability to attract and retain international talent, much of it which comes from the EU. The creative industries also export almost 10% of the UK's services worldwide, and the EU is our primary trading partner. Membership of the EU, its single market, customs union, funding programs, regulations, and more has been crucial to this significance. The biggest threat to this success story is Brexit and its potential negative impact on funding opportunities, recruitment, skill shortages, and the reputational damage to the UK. At Superflux, we are a foresight, design, and innovation company. We create tangible and highly visceral visions of the future. By directly experiencing these possible futures, decision makers are able to better understand the consequences of the decisions today. For instance, we helped the government of the United Arab Emirates invest in renewables by showing them what business as usual would look like. We had ministers of the cabinet inhale air samples, polluted air samples from 2030. Highly noxious. Nobody would want to leave such a legacy. We collaborate with organizations working across borders and nationalities. Essentially, though we are based in the UK, our team includes people from Austria, Lithuania, Canada, and more. I'm also teaching as Professor of Design at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. It is vital to our culture that we can be outward-looking. Across the corridor from me is Unmade. 3 years ago, this was a knitwear software startup with 3 founders and 1 employee. They've pioneered software which is changing the face of knitwear, repatriating jobs that historically were in the UK but then lost to mass production capability of the Far East. Their software enables the purchaser to co-author and buy a one-off piece of knitwear manufactured in Scotland. Recently, they did a product line for the Winter Olympics in partnership with Ralph Lauren. They now have 25 employees, mostly software engineers, 25% of whom are elsewhere in the EU, necessary because there is a huge skills shortage. Their experience is that the reputational damage of Brexit to the UK is already enormous, with much of this talent leaving to relocate to Berlin and other cities. Not because that is what the law says, but because the message that this country is already broadcasting is one of insularity and closed borders. In the recent years, UK has promoted itself as a nation that leads the world in creativity, which produces immense soft power, but more importantly, as I have mentioned, is a key driver for the UK economy and jobs. Even before Brexit is the known quantity, the signs are that we are killing the golden goose. Let's wake up and rescue the situation. I'm now delighted to hand over to the former Prime Minister. Please welcome Sir John Major.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to begin by expressing my thanks to the Creative Industries Federation, Somerset House Trust and Tech London Advocates for the opportunity to be here today. I must confess, when I accepted, I hadn't imagined it was going to be quite such a busy week for Brexit, but no matter, perhaps that's appropriate. Now, as we've just heard, Brexit matters to the creative industries. And the creative industries matter. They express our culture and our values, but they give so much more. Nearly 10% of our workforce is in creative industries. And they're often young, predominantly young, and overwhelmingly in small units in every part of the United Kingdom. Job growth, as you've heard, outpaces every other part of industry, and especially powerfully in the Midlands and Yorkshire. Their exports total over 35 billion a year. But their added value to our country, both economically and socially, is incalculable and far beyond cash. Our decision to leave the European Union faces the creative industry with a variety of threats that could harm their future, both in financial and in human terms. So I'm delighted to be their guest this afternoon to talk of Brexit. For years, the European debate has been dominated by the fringes of opinion, by strong supporters of Europe or by convinced opponents. But as we approach Brexit, the voice of middle opinion mustn't be overlooked. I am neither a Europhile nor a Eurosceptic. As Prime Minister, I said no to federal integration, no to the euro currency and no to Schengen, which introduced free movement of people within the European Union, but without proper control of external borders. But I am a realist, and I believe that to risk losing our trade advantage with the colossal market on our doorstep is to inflict economic self-harm on the British people. Of course, the will of the people can't be ignored, but Parliament has a duty also to consider the well-being of the people. No one voted for higher prices and poorer public services, but that's what they may get. The emerging evidence suggests Brexit will hurt most those who have least, and neither Parliament nor government wish to see that. The will of the people, so often summed up when sound argument is absent, was supported by 37% of the electorate. 63% voted either in favour of remaining as a member of the European Union or did not vote at all. So there was a majority for Brexit, but there was no overwhelming mandate to ignore the reservations of 16 million voters who believe it will be a harmful change of direction for our country. Brexit has been the most divisive issue of my political lifetime. It's divided not only the four nations of the United Kingdom, but regions within those nations. It's divided political parties, political colleagues, families, friends, and the young from the old, as the ballot box showed us very clearly on referendum day. Now, we have to heal those divisions. They've been made worse by the character of the Brexit debate so far, with its intolerance, its bullying, and its name-calling. I welcome rigorous debate, but there must be respect for differing views honestly held. In this debate, there are no Ramonas, no mutineers, no enemies of the people, just voices setting out what they believe is right for our country. In recent weeks, the idea has gained ground that Brexit won't be too bad, that we'll all get through it, that we're doing better than expected, and that all will be well. Of course we will get through it. Life as we know it won't come to an end. We're too resourceful and talented a nation for that. But our nation is owed a frank assessment of what leaving Europe may mean, both for now and for the future. I fear that we will be weaker and less prosperous as a country and as individuals. And although it grieves me to admit it, our divorce from Europe will diminish our international stature. Indeed, I would argue it already has. For decades, we British have supercharged our influence around the world by our closeness to the United States, where policy divisions are broadening, and our membership of the European Union, which we are abandoning. As a result, we are already becoming a lesser actor. No one, leaver or remainer, can welcome that. We're all urged to be patriotic and to get behind Brexit. But it is precisely because I am patriotic that I'm opposed to it. I want my country to be influential, not isolated. I want it committed, not cut off. I want it to be a leading participant, not a bystander. And I want us to be richer, not poorer. Yet every serious international body, including the IMF, the OECD, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the National Institute for Economic and Social Research, as well as prize-winning Nobel economists, all forecast we will be poorer outside the European Union. Of course, such forecasts could be wrong, but to dismiss them out of hand is reckless in the extreme. Our own government have also assessed our post-Brexit position upon three separate criteria: that we stay in the single market, that we reach a trade deal with Europe, or that we fail to do so. Each option, carefully assessed, shows us to be worse off, and disastrously so with no trade deal at all. And the poorest regions will be those that are hurt the most. Now, if, as the negotiations proceed, this analysis turns out to be correct, that cannot be brushed aside. I know of no precedent for any government enacting a policy that will make both our country and our people poorer. Once that is apparent, the government must change course. Meanwhile, we're yet again told that all will be well. Certainly, the recent fall in the value of sterling has temporarily boosted our exports. The strength of the world economy may even increase our forecast growth this year. But this sweet spot is artificial. It won't last. Prosperity isn't built on devaluing the currency. More exports on the back of other countries' economic growth is not a secure economic position. The United Kingdom, our country, has been at the very top of European growth over many years. We are now the laggard at the bottom. We have become the slowest of the world's big economies. And that has happened post-referendum, but even before we surrender the familiar advantages of the single market. Our negotiations, so far, have not always been sure-footed. Some agreements have been reached, but in many areas only because the United Kingdom has given ground. Our determination to negotiate the divorce bill and a new trade deal at the same time was going to be, you may recall, the fight of the summer. Instead, it became an immediate British retreat. There was to be a points-based immigration system. There isn't, and there won't be. We were to become then the Singapore of the North. We've retreated now from a policy of lower taxes and deregulation. No transition period was going to be needed, but we've now asked for one, during which we will accept new European Union rules, European court jurisdiction, and free movement of people. Now, I don't remind you of this to be critical. I do so to illustrate that unrealistic aspirations once set out are usually followed by ignominious retreat. And that is a lesson for the negotiations that are still to come. They will be the most complex, the most difficult that any government has faced. Our aims in those negotiations must be realistic, and I am not personally sure that they yet are. We simply cannot move forward with leaving the European Union, the single market, the customs union, and the European Court of Justice, whilst at the same time demanding an à la carte, beneficial to Britain, bespoke entrance to the European market. It is simply not a credible negotiating position. A willingness to compromise is essential. If either side, the United Kingdom or the European Union, both sides, either side, if either side is too inflexible, too unbending, too wedded to what they won't do rather than what they could do, then the negotiations will fail. The very essence of negotiation involves both give and take. But there are always red lines that neither side wishes to cross. In successful negotiations, those red lines are traded for concessions. If our red lines are held to be inviolable, the likelihood of no deal or a very poor deal increases. Every single time we close off options prematurely, this encourages the European Union to do the same, and that is not in our British interest. A good Brexit for Britain will protect our trade advantages. It will enable us to continue to sell our goods and services without disruption, to import and export food without barriers and without extra cost. It will enable us to staff our hospitals, our universities, and our businesses with the skills we need, where and when we need them. It will involve being part of the cutting edge of European research, in which British brains and British skills can lead the way. And it will mean we continue with the over 40 free trade agreements that cover nearly 60 countries in total that we have with countries only as a result of our membership of the European Union. A bad Brexit for Britain will surrender these and other advantages. For the moment, our self-imposed red lines have boxed the government into a corner. They are so tilted to ultra-Brexit opinion, even the Cabinet cannot agree them. And a majority in both Houses of Parliament oppose them. If maintained in full, it will be impossible to reach a favourable trade agreement. Alarmed at the negotiations so far, the financial sector, businesses and our academic institutions are pleading for common sense policy to serve the national interest. And fearful they may not get it, are making their own preparations for the future. Japanese car makers, through the Japanese ambassador, warned they could close operations in Britain unless we maintain free access to the European Union. That would be heartbreaking for many people in Sunderland, in Swindon, or in South Wales. And this isn't Project Fear revisited, it is Project Know Your History. Any doubters should consult the former employees of factories now closed in Bridgend, Port Talbot and Newport, where jobs were lost and families suffered. In 1991, employment by Japanese firms in Wales was about 17,000 people. Today, it is 2,000. if free access to Europe is lost, that scale of impact, if carried across the United Kingdom, could lose 125,000 jobs with Japanese firms. Over many years, the Conservative Party has understood the concerns of business. Not over Brexit, it seems. Across the United Kingdom, businesses are expressing their wish to stay in the single market and the customs union. But no, say the government's red lines. Businesses wish to have the freedom to employ foreign skills. But no, say the government's red lines. Business and academia wish to welcome foreign students to our universities and, as they rise to influence back in their own countries, would then have willing partners in politics and business for decades to come. But no, say the government's red lines. This is not only grand folly, it is bad politics. The national interest must always be above the party interest. But my party should beware. It is only fear of Mr. Corbyn and Mr. McDonnell that prevents a hemorrhage of business support. Without the comprehensive trade deal that the Prime Minister so rightly seeks, we risk economic divorce from the European Union and the chill embrace of a hard Brexit with World Trade Organization rules. Now, leading Brexit supporters tell us there's nothing to fear from losing our special access to the single market. But to me, that seems to be profoundly wrong. Swapping the single market for World Trade Organization rules would mean our exports facing the European Union external tariff, as well as hidden non-tariff barriers that could be adjusted to our disadvantage at any moment. One minister has speculated we could face tariffs of 3%, if only. But it's not so. It's much more likely that we will face tariffs on cars of 10%, on food of 14%, on drinks of 20%, and on dairy products of 36%. And even if a successful negotiation were to halve those tariffs, our exports would still be far more expensive to sell. And this would apply way beyond agriculture and the motor industry. And if, in retaliation, the UK were to impose tariffs on imports from our European partners, this would result in higher prices for the British consumer. And if we and the European Union agreed both to impose nil tariffs on one another, as some have speculated, World Trade Organization rules mean we would both, ourselves and Europe, have to offer nil tariffs to all the countries we trade with. That simply isn't going to happen. Now, this is all very complex, but it is crucial, and none of it has yet been properly explained to the British people. There have been attempts to reassure business by claiming that other nations trade with the European Union on purely World Trade Organization terms. That statement is simply wrong. China, the United States, and Japan all have side agreements with Europe on standards, on customs cooperation, on mutual recognition, and on investment. And these economic giants, with their huge economies, did so to protect their own European trade, even though none of them is exposed as we are, with half our entire exports going to Europe. Ultra-Brexit opinion is impatient to be free of European relationships, to become, in their words, a global player, sovereign, in control. I believe they are deceiving themselves and, as a result, are misleading the British nation. Before the modern world took shape, their ambition would have been credible. But the world has changed. The global market has taken root. And if we are to care for the people of our nation, philosophical fantasies must give way to national self-interest. We cannot prepare for tomorrow by living in the world of yesterday. I don't doubt the convictions of those who long for the seductive embrace of British exceptionalism. But those sentiments are out of date and in today's world simply wrong. Now, it's not my purpose to stir controversy, but the truth must be spoken. The ultra-Brexiteers have been mistaken, have been wrong in nearly all they have said or promised so far to the British nation. The promises of more hospitals, more schools, lower taxes, more money for transport were electioneering fantasy during the referendum. The 350 million a week, that notorious figure, that 350 million a week for the National Health Service was a ridiculous phantom. The reality is that if our economy weakens, as is forecast, there will not only be less money for the National Health Service, but very probably less money for every single one of our public services. Now, we were told that nobody was threatening our place in the single market. Well, that tune has changed. We were told that a trade deal with the European Union would be easy to get. We could do it in an afternoon. Wrong again. It was never going to be easy, and we are still not sure what outcome will be achieved. We were told memorably that Europe can whistle for their money, and we would not pay a penny in exit costs. Wrong again. Europe didn't even have to purse her lips to whistle before we'd agreed to pay £40 billion to meet legitimate liabilities. Now, I could go on, but I think the point is made. Suffice to say that nearly every one of the Brexit promises is, if I may quote Henry Fielding, and I do now, a very wholesome and comfortable doctrine to which there is but one objection, namely, it is not true. Now, people should pause and reflect. If the Brexit leaders were wrong in what they so enthusiastically said before, is it not possible that they are wrong in what they now say as well? The Prime Minister is seeking a frictionless border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. She is absolutely right to do so. This is a promise that must be honoured, and I wish her well. But so far, it's not materialised, nor, I fear, will it, unless we stay in a or the customs union. Those of us who warned of the risks that Brexit would bring to the still fragile peace process were told at the time that we didn't understand Irish politics. It now seems we understood it better than our critics. We need a policy urgently to protect the Good Friday Agreement, and we need one without delay. And it is our British responsibility to find one. We created the problem, not the European Union. We need to offer a solution and not simply oppose what other people suggest. Now, although the referendum was advisory only, the result gave the government the obligation to negotiate a Brexit. They couldn't avoid it. But they didn't have the obligation to negotiate any Brexit, not at all costs, and certainly not on any terms. The true remit can only be to agree a Brexit that honours the promises made to the British nation during the referendum. But so far, the promises have not been met and probably cannot be met. Many electors now know they were misled. Many more are beginning to realise it. So the electorate has every right to reconsider their decision. Meanwhile, our options become ever narrower. We have ruled out full membership, ruled out the single market and the customs union, ruled out joining the European Economic Area, dismissed talk of joining EFTA. A Norway deal won't do, we're told, nor will a Swiss deal, or a Ukraine deal, a Turkey deal, or a South Korean deal. No to all of them, say the government's red lines. So little is left, except cherry-picking, which the European Union rejects, or a comprehensive deal, which will be very hard, if not impossible, to get. So compromises it must be, or no deal at all. It is now widely accepted that no deal would be the worst possible outcome. The compromise must therefore focus around our accepting single market rules, as Norway does, and paying for access, or an enhanced Canada deal, and it would need to be enhanced a very great deal indeed to be attractive. The Canada deal largely concerns goods, whereas the bulk of UK exports are services. But what we achieve to protect our interests may depend upon what we are prepared to concede. It is, as I say, in any negotiation, some give and some take. If our red lines dissolve, our options enlarge. Our minimum objective must be that, I quote, deep, special and bespoke trade deal the Prime Minister has talked of. So some unpalatable decisions lie ahead, with the cast iron certainty that the extreme and unbending Brexit lobby will cry betrayal at every compromise. But it is Parliament, not a small minority, that must decide our policy. I spoke earlier of the divisiveness of Brexit across every part of the United Kingdom. But in due time, even the Brexit debate will end. And when it does, we need the highest possible level of public acceptance for the outcome. It is in no one's interest, no one's at all, for the bitterness and the division to linger on. I see only one way to achieve that. It is already agreed that Parliament must pass legislation giving effect to the deal. A meaningful vote has been promised. This must be a decisive vote in which Parliament can accept or reject the final outcome, or send the negotiators back to seek improvements, or order a referendum so the public may approve what has been determined. That is what parliamentary sovereignty really means. But to minimise divisions in our country, and between and within the political parties, I believe the government should take a further, very brave and bold decision. I believe they should invite Parliament to accept or reject the final outcome on a free vote. I know the instinct historically of every government is to oppose free votes. But the government should weigh the advantages of having one very carefully. They may find it is in their own interest to do so. There are some very practical reasons in favour of a free vote. Brexit is a unique decision. It will affect the lives of the British nation for generations to come. And if it flops, there will be the most terrible backlash. If Brexit is whipped through Parliament, at a time when the public are so divided about it, voters will know who to blame if they end up poorer and weaker. So both democracy and prudence suggest a free vote. The deep divisions in our nation are more likely to be healed by a Brexit freely approved by Parliament than a Brexit forced through Parliament at the behest of a minority of convinced opponents of Europe. And a free vote would better reflect the reality that for every 17 voters who voted for Brexit, 16 opted to remain within the European Union. But regardless of whether a free vote is offered, parliamentarians must decide the issue on the basis of their own conscience, upon whether, in mature judgment, they really do believe that the outcome of the negotiations is in the best interests of the people they are elected to serve. By 2021, after the likely 2-year transition, it will be 5 years since the 2016 referendum. The electorate will have changed. Some voters will have left us. Many new voters will be enfranchised. Others may have changed their mind. Nobody can truly know what the will of the people may then be. So let Parliament decide, or put the issue back to the people. And what is true for the House of Commons must apply to the House of Lords. Peers must ignore any noises off and be guided by their intellect and by their conscience. I have been a Conservative all my life. I don't enjoy being out of step with so many of my party, and I take no pleasure at all in speaking out as I have today. But it's as necessary to speak truth to the people as it is to speak truth to power. Leaving Europe is an issue so far-reaching, so permanent, so overarching, that it will have an impact on all our lives, and most especially on the young and their futures. With only 12 months to go, we need answers, not aspirations. This decision is far more than a party issue. It's about the future of our United Kingdom and everyone who lives in it. That is what matters, and that is why I'm here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir John. My name is John Campner. I'm the Chief Executive of the Creative Industries Federation, and once again I welcome everybody here, the audience of Federation members, Somerset House residents and Tech London advocates, and also a very large contingent of media, unsurprisingly, here for this incredibly powerful speech. And if I may say, Sir John, in a week in which this speech is being bookended by a speech by the Leader of the Opposition and by the Prime Minister, this one has the merit of great clarity. And we're going to throw it open to questions. We have half an hour for questions. I will go first to, as I say, the audience as distinct from media for the moment, but I do want to come to media. When I do come to you, if you could please say who you are, who you represent. Please make it a question, not a statement. Make it short and make it factual as well, because we've got a lot of people to get through and a lot of people want to ask questions. But if I could use Chair's prerogative and ask you, Sir John, first of all, you spoke very eloquently about the role of Parliament, parliamentary sovereignty, and calling for a free vote. You also mentioned in the speech that the people have every right to reconsider their decision, and one of those options being put to Parliament you proffered was calling for a second referendum. Can I just clarify, on principle, is it your view that at any point between now and the end of either next March or the end of the transition/implementation period, it would be desirable, come what may, for there to be a second referendum?
No, I would prefer Parliament to decide the issue. I don't instinctively like referenda. I think on immensely complex issues like that, people vote on a whole range of issues. And we are a representative democracy, so my preference would be for Parliament to decide. But if Parliament decides that the divisions are so great that the way to minimise future division is to put it back to the country for a referendum, then I would fully understand and support that. But I'm not actually advocating it, but I think it is an option that must be open for Parliament to decide.
Thank you. Let's go to questions. There's a microphone which is here. here, Evie, yep, and then here in the fourth row as a second question. Thank you.
Ellis Rich, Independent Music Group. Sir John, do you believe that Theresa May has potentially given Jeremy Corbyn the key to Downing Street, and what would she have to say on Friday to take it back?
Well, I don't think I'm going to trail what the Prime Minister may say tomorrow, but like everyone else, I'm eagerly looking forward to her speech. I don't think anyone has handed the keys of Downing Street to Jeremy Corbyn. One of the interesting facets of this apparent great Labour revival under Jeremy Corbyn is that most people like me who've been in Parliament for 30 years believe very strongly in present circumstances in the middle of a Parliament that if Labour had almost any other leader, they'd have a lead of 15 to 20%, not be level pegging in the opinion polls. So I think no one has handed Jeremy Corbyn the keys of Downing Street, and I think the British nation are much too sensible to do so.
Sir John, thank you for your address. At the moment, it seems as though every argument... Sorry, my name is Christoph Warwick and I'm Chief Executive at Open Cinema. At the moment, it seems as though every argument warning of the risks of Brexit seems only to compound the ideologies of those wishing it upon us. Do you think that the collective communicative powers of the industries represented here, amongst whom there seems to be a consensus about those risks, can do more to make the case for a rethink, not just as you suggest by the government, but by the public?
Well, I've absolutely no doubt of it. I mean, if I can widen it beyond the creative industries, it is an extraordinary reality that if you talk to the majority, not all, of course, there's never unanimity on an issue like this, but if you talk to a majority of the captains of industry, they are very strongly opposed to Brexit. They believe it will be bad for their industries. But most of them are extremely reluctant to speak out and say so, because they know half of their customers may be in favour of Brexit and half not. And so they are silent opponents rather than outspoken opponents. And that, sadly, was true during the period of the referendum as well. So I think if business were actually to decide that they would speak out and say what they truly believe, rather than fume in private but not express their concerns in public, if they would express their concerns in public, I think it would have a significant impact on public opinion. And I would very much hope that business will find it necessary to do so.
Questions? Lady there. Wait for the microphone, please. And then here, thank you.
Thank you. Sarah John from Best for Britain. We are an anti-Brexit campaign, and at this point we're unequivocally campaigning to stop Brexit, which we believe can only really be done before the end of March 2019. I want to ask you a question as one of the architects of peace in Northern Ireland, and looking at the agreement, which is contradictory in many places in the Phase 1 agreement, about where the Irish border should be, whether it should be soft or hard, or whether it should be between Northern Ireland and Ireland, or in the North Sea somewhere. What is your view of the problems, and whether this is a soluble problem, and whether if we allow a soft border, that is putting the integrity of the UK at risk potentially as well?
There is no more complex problem in all these negotiations than the problem of the Northern Ireland border. And that has been evident from the very outset. The tragedy is that a number of people who should have known better denied there was a problem and offered solutions that were patently not going to succeed. The can was continually kicked down the road, and now we find ourselves in a position where we are going to need some form of firm decision very speedily. One decision is clear. Were we to join the customs union, it would need to be a customs union. Actually, if we leave Europe, we can't be in the customs union, so it would have to be a customs union agreement. That would certainly solve the problem of not having to have a hard border. There's a huge amount of trade that crosses both north-south and even more east-west between Ireland and the United Kingdom. With the north-south border, there are many things that are manufactured in the south, packaged in the north, returned to the south. There's a lot of cross-border activity. Some of it can be dealt with in the way some government ministers have proposed, with technology and frictionless trade. But you can't do that when you get to public health. You can't do that when you have animals, I give one example of many, animals crossing the border because they may be carrying infectious diseases, they may have BSE, there may be 100 different things. They will actually need to be physically examined. So I have spent a lot of time thinking about this. I wish I could find an easy solution. The only solution that I yet know, and there may be others, I concede that, the government may have ideas I haven't thought of, very probably. But the only idea that I have been able to come up with that would clearly deal with that problem is to join a customs union. And I know that carries with it for many people disadvantages, but I think the prize of peace across Ireland and the extraordinary improvement in relations between the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom in the last 20 years is a quite significant prize. And if I could make just a trading point about it, people ought not to regard Ireland as a nation that doesn't do much trade with us. We actually have more trade with Ireland than we have with South Korea, India, Australia, and New Zealand added together. So it's not an insignificant problem. I know of only the one solution at the moment. My mind is open to others, and I will wait and be fascinated by any further suggestions that may come forward.
Thomas Cole from the cross-party pro-European organisation Open Britain. What would your message be to pro-European Conservative MPs in Parliament right now, especially with the trade bill and the customs bill coming up? What would your message be to them precisely, especially when they're in a position where they're in a party where the majority of the party is in favour of a hard Brexit and pro-European Conservatives are in the minority? Thank you.
Members of Parliament have a range of different responsibilities. One of them, beyond any doubt, is a responsibility to the party and to the party's manifesto. That is undoubtedly true. But they also have a responsibility to the constituents who elected them and the well-being of those constituents who elected them. There is now a range of evidence that shows that people across the country, without exception, in every region and in every industry, are likely, no one can be certain, likely to be worse off if we leave the European Union. In some parts of the country, the northeast particularly, the northwest, parts of South Wales, the West Midlands, people will be significantly worse off under some of the Brexit options. Now, I think that it is necessary to continually turn the argument away from the philosophical differences that have dominated this debate so far. We want to be sovereign, we want to take back control. Slogans which are very compelling to people, but which, when examined, are very largely empty in many ways. And people have to look at what the practical effect is on the people who live in their constituencies. And that is something I think every member of Parliament should do, and I hope they will do, and then convey the message of what is right for their constituents back to their party organisations in a hope of influencing policy. And if it doesn't influence policy, they must make the decision whether to vote for their party ticket or their constituents' well-being.
Thank you. Now happy to also to extend it to colleagues from the media. We'll do a mix, but let's, a lady there about 10 rows back who I can see, yep, their hand up. And then gentlemen here standing. And then we'll go to that side.
Thank you. Alison Little from the Daily Express. So, John, you set out the achievements you achieved with Europe in your dealings with them, keeping us out of the euro, keeping us out of Schengen, which even we would applaud you for, I'm sure. And what is it exactly that makes you so certain that Theresa May cannot, like you, face down the doubters and get what she is seeking from Brussels? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, because it's an extremely perceptive question, if I may say so. And I will offer you a better illustration than what I did. I was able to keep us out of the euro quite simply because the Europeans needed my vote to pass the euro because it needed unanimity, and I refused to join unanimity unless they gave us an exit from the euro currency. So I had some leverage. That was the point. And if I can go back to the famous occasion when Mrs. Thatcher got her rebate back, it wasn't just that she was a tough negotiator. People forget it actually took 5 years to get her rebate back. And she really got it back in the end, not just because she was a tough negotiator, though she was. She got it back because she had leverage. Because when it came to the crunch, the Europeans wished to increase the budget because they were running out of money, and she was able to refuse that because it was needed to be a unanimous agreement, and she declined unless we got the rebate. So the point is, both in Margaret's case and in mine, we had real leverage that Europe wanted to do something that we could stop and were prepared to stop if they were not prepared to deal with the problems we have. That circumstance doesn't apply now. That's why I think that Mrs. May has a much more difficult negotiating position than the one I had in the illustrations I set out, or in the case of Mrs. Thatcher 30 years ago.
Thank you.
So John, Chris Hope from Telegraph. As Prime Minister 20 years ago, you complained about being undermined by Eurosceptic bastards in your cabinet. So why are you undermining the PM today? And have you thought about quitting the party over Brexit?
I've been in the party a good deal longer than most people, Christopher. A good deal longer than most of the people who are really undermining the Prime Minister today by telling her what she must negotiate or they will withdraw their support in Parliament. So I have absolutely no intention of quitting the party that I've been in since I was 16 and which I wish to see follow policies that are a bit different from some of those they're following now. There is an occasion with every political party when for a time they may lose their balance a little on a particular subject. I think that may be the case now. I think it is necessary to try and restore that balance, and that is what I am trying to do. The advice I have given today is, I think, good advice. It's not an intention to undermine the Prime Minister. I barely mentioned her, except to say she was right over Northern Ireland to give that priority. So I think the premise of your question, Christopher, with great respect, is contentious. And the suggestion that after so many years as a member of the Conservative Party that I am going to believe it because a minority of members of Parliament have a policy I don't agree with is unlikely to be advice I will follow.
It's times like this I miss my old trade and I miss the newspaper where I started out. There's a question, yeah, here in the middle there, thank you, and then right here at the front, thank you.
Hello, Tom Peck from The Independent. You spoke at length about promises made by the Leave side which turned out to be false. But there were also warnings made by the Remain side which have not come to pass. So what can you say to people who have listened to warnings that are slightly different from those made by Remain 2 years ago but are similar in spirit that you've made today, who just don't see the warnings that were made previously having come to pass and just don't take these new ones seriously, who just don't who are so Remain that
I think it's a real problem. I think there were one or two people on the Remain side as well who over-egged the problems, and not only over-egged them, brought them forward as though they were going to be immediate, when in fact they're quite long-term problems. But what we now have, and you're mainly talking, of course, about a decline in economic growth over the next few years, we now have not just individuals who are participants in the pro or anti-Brexit debate, but dispassionate observers who have done a careful analysis of our economy over the next 15 years, who unanimously, with the single exception of economists for Brexit, all say that in every region, over that period of time, we are going to be worse off. So those warnings, nobody can be sure they're forecasts. Nobody can be sure they'll be absolutely correct. But even though there is a tendency to disparage experts, I think I'd rather believe Nobel Prize winners and distinguished economists than people who do their sums on the back of an envelope. Personally, I'm rather in favour of experts. I would much rather, if I were going to have a tooth pulled, I'd much rather go to an expert than not. And I think the same principle applies elsewhere. So yes, some people did overdo it, but if you look over a range of years and the evidence that is daily becoming more and more available, not just occasionally, but daily becoming more available, we are going to be worse off. And by we, I don't only mean the country as a whole and business, and I don't particularly mean the well-heeled and better off who will survive anyway. I mean the people who are at the bottom of the heap, who are the people who usually get hurt first when the economy begins to decline. And it's about time we began to look at the reality of what Brexit will mean for those people. If we need a greater equality in our society, and my goodness, we still do, then we need to look at their interests. And rather than just looking at it, we need to turn to policies that would actually prevent them getting worse off and help them become a little better off.
We've got a question right here, and then we've got 3 or 4 at the back there on my left. Yes.
Thank you. Dan Roberts from The Guardian. I just wanted to take you back, Sir John, to the option of a second referendum, which I acknowledge you said is not your preferred outcome, but I think you're one of the most senior people to have yet presented it as something that Parliament could or should vote on. I wondered, what do you envisage happening if the referendum is close, in either way? Because the polls show at the moment that things haven't budged that much. What happens next?
You can't keep having a referendum. If we've had the legislation and Parliament are equivocal about it, and if Parliament decide there must be a referendum, that is it. If it's won by one vote, that's it. I certainly wouldn't complain. It's finished. We've got to draw a line under this sometime. But I am very anxious. I'm very concerned about the bitterness and division we have seen during this referendum. There isn't a single person in this room who doesn't know families that disagree, never mind the political parties, they're used to arguments, but families and friends who disagree, and really sharp differences. We've got to draw a line under it. And that's why I think it is better if we turn to Parliament rather than a political party in Parliament, and why I think it is better if Parliament so decide that they turn it back to the people for a second referendum. But that is it. I would have no truck or patience with anybody who thought we would then have to have the best of 3. If we have another, that's it.
Right, some questions at the back. I think Adam, was there? Yeah, with it. Yeah.
Stefanie Bolzen,
Stephanie,
German daily Die Welt. German industry or German business is already taking quite a hit because of Brexit. So yesterday there was a new report that exports to the UK have shrunk by 2% already. When it comes to a hard Brexit, and when there is considerations whether it's more important politically to keep the integrity of the single market or allow what you might call cherry picking, do you think that there are chances that Britain can have the cake and eat it?
I think there's something between nil and zilch that we can have our cake and eat it. It's an absurd proposition. The European Union is a rule-based organisation, and I think from all I know of it over so many years and a lot of negotiation that I did with it, they will cling to the integrity of the single market. I have no doubt of that. There are negotiations can be done, but if it is a choice, the integrity of the single market and the rules-based element of the European Union will end up being predominant. I am sure of that.
Thank you. Because of the lighting, I can't quite see.
Adam Bolton, Sky News. Sir John, I just want to return to the Irish border, which could be classed as one of your specialist subjects, I suppose. Do you think what the European Union has said today in its draft conclusions is acceptable, that effectively to protect the Good Friday Agreement there could be regulatory convergence imposed on Northern Ireland, separating it from the rest of the UK? And do you believe that that is what the Prime Minister agreed to in December? And finally, what do you think of the congestion charge solution to the border?
I don't think I'm going to comment on the third, on the grounds that I still like to be a serious politician. The European Union paper, I gather, was only released at 1:30, by which time I was on my way to this meeting. So I'm reluctant to comment in detail because I haven't yet seen it. But I do think from what I have heard of it, that it would be a proposition that's unlikely to fly with the British Parliament. So I don't think it is going to ease away all the difficulties. I reiterate the point I sought to make earlier. We ask Europe to come up with ideas, and they have produced some. It may well be that they are ideas that will not fly. I suspect that may be the case from what I have heard about what is proposed, but I enter that caveat. And so I don't think I'm pinning my hopes on that today. which is why I still think we are going to have to wait for any further proposals by the British government. And I think one has to reiterate this point. We British, by our decision to leave Europe, created this problem. It wasn't created in Ireland, and it wasn't created in the European Union. We created it. And the obligation, it seems to me, morally and politically, is for us to find a solution. And one solution, of course, is to join or to negotiate a customs union. If there is any other solution, I'm certainly open to looking at it very carefully. But thus far, I don't know what it might be, and I certainly don't have one to suggest.
We've got time for 3 or 4 more questions. I'm conscious that we've done a big raft of media questions. I'd like to just give 1 or 2 questions further to the core audience, so to speak, and then to go back to the last question or 2 to the media. So if that, I could just see a hand, somebody sitting, and then a hand there standing, as long as it's not media, and then we'll go to media. Yeah.
Hello.
Oh, okay, you go first, and then the person sitting, right, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Victoria, and we're based in Somerset House. We're an SME in the creative industries, and we've already lost staff post-Brexit back to the EU, and many of our clients, also based here, are small startups, particularly in hardware and tech, and they're asking us, should we move? What is the answer I'm supposed to give these companies?
I was fortunate enough yesterday afternoon to have the opportunity to look around Somerset House and to meet some of the young enterprises that are here. And I must say it was unlike anything, if I can divert for a moment, it was unlike anything I've ever seen before. The extent to which it's a cooperative with small SMEs, maybe 2 or 3 people, maybe a dozen, sharing similar equipment and offices in a way I have never seen before. It's extraordinarily innovative, and it's extraordinarily helpful to enable small SMEs to start. So I'm full of admiration for what is actually being done here. I learned yesterday, indeed, everywhere I went, I was told yesterday, about staff they were fearful they could not get because they were overseas, or staff they had got that they were fearful they would lose or had lost. I very much hope that the reality of what this means for our country will become apparent. We don't yet know whether we stay in or whether we finally leave fully, what the immigration position is actually going to be. But what we are seeing at the moment is that there has been a dramatic drop in European immigration and a significant increase in immigration from other parts of the world to compensate for it. The European immigration has always been very valuable to us for several reasons. Firstly, if you take the whole of the care services, the National Health Service and social care, there are 60,000 European Union citizens actually offering social care or health care in one form or another across the United Kingdom. How one replaces those when we have full employment in this country, I'm not entirely sure. And whether we could replace the skills of 10,000 doctors and many thousands of nurses, I'm absolutely certain that we couldn't, at least for many years. So I think we have to look at that practical problem. And we don't yet know what the government's proposals will be for immigration when we come to the end of this discussion. What we have seen already is a dramatic drop in European immigration. If I could make one other point about it. Most European immigration tends to be for a few years only. It isn't permanent immigration. They come here for a few years, they return home. More to the point, they have very low demands in terms of access and housing compared to many others for a raft of reasons. And they don't retire here. In many ways, they bring their skills when they are needed, and later on they leave and return home taking their skills with them, which sounds to me like a pretty good description of exactly the sort of skilled migrancy we need to power an economy like the United Kingdom. I will advance that argument. I know others will. And I have to say, some of those people who are in favour of Brexit have a long past record of being liberal on migration. So I'm hopeful we will be able to reach a sensible settlement that avoids the problem you have. So I hope firms and SMEs in particular will not be precipitate in deciding they can't flourish here. because there are many things here that make it an ideal environment for small and growing firms, and I think sensible policy will seek to keep it that way. I certainly hope so.
And yesterday, Sir John, I was in Gateshead at the launch of the Great Exhibition of the North, a huge creative and tech summit across the Northeast this summer. And that example of the colleague there from Somerset House was replicated, that there is more than anecdotal evidence of people not taking up jobs and people leaving. Specifically to that point, if a young 20-something French said, should I come or should I stay, is your answer yes, emphatically, we will work this out?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not in a position to work it out. I'm only in a position to express a view. Were I in a position to work it out, I could be more confident about it. But I do think that at the end we will be sensible and pragmatic about this. I don't decry the concern there is about the sum total of migration. It has been huge, and in terms of things like housing and education, it has put great strains on our services, particularly in some parts of the country. So you can't just pretend that problem doesn't exist. But what we have seen with European migration is that European migrants overwhelmingly, I can't say unanimously, but overwhelmingly are here because they have a particular skill that our country needs. And unless we are cutting off our nose to spite our face, we will take account of that when we finally reach decisions. So I hope people will bear with the British a little longer and give us a little longer to sort out our concerns, because I hope that they may be sorted out in a way that will be that will enable them to stay and to contribute both to their own careers and to their companies in the United Kingdom.
Got time for two more questions. The penultimate question to a core audience member, and then a final question to a member of the media. Second, sorry, do you mind, John? Second row, right here at the front, please, Evie. Thank you. Yeah, here, lady here. Yeah, thanks. Wait 1 second. Thank you.
Carol Tongue, UK Coalition for Cultural Diversity. Do you think, Sir John, and I thank you very much for your words today, that we can broaden the argument beyond just the economic argument and extol the virtues of what we share with others, and how in some things we lead, in other things others lead, and we have so much to gain by that mutual sharing?
Well, I do hope so, because I'm glad you raised that. It's a very important point. There's nobody here who hasn't seen people sitting in outside cafes as though they were in Paris, or outside pubs, often in rather inclement weather, at the end of a long day, drinking as though they were somewhere on the continent. We have borrowed a great deal from the continent. I remember being very struck during the referendum debate. I was walking through the market in my former constituency of Huntingdon when I was approached by someone with some Brexit pamphlets, and we engaged in discussion. And he said to me, "You're just a real European, you are," he said. "Not like me," he said. "I'm a Brit," he said. "I'm a real Anglo-Saxon." I said, "Where do you think Saxony is?" And there was a baffled look of incomprehension. And I think I'm prepared to bet that there's nobody here that knows anybody who is genetically wholly English, Scottish, Welsh, or Northern Irish. We all have, through centuries and centuries of intermingling with people who've come to this country and remained in this country, we all have a different and wider genetic heritage than simply the Angles of ancient Britain. So I hope we can recognize that and be more outward-going than sometimes we are.
Final question to a member of the media. It's no pressure, make it the best one. Right, person sitting, yeah, with a hand up, just there. Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Jason Groves from the Daily Mail. Sir John, your party subcontracted this decision to the public. You didn't like the decision they made, and you now want Parliament to take that back and overturn it. Do you not think there's a danger that in doing so, that may cause some of the bitterness that you seek to avoid, and that you may be sowing the seeds of an even bigger constitutional crisis down the line?
I seem to remember that one of the central parts of the debate was about the sovereignty of Parliament. That was a significant part of the debate throughout the whole of the discussion. And it is also clear that because of the nature of the question, it was a very straightforward question. It didn't deal with any of the complexities of the European Union. For example, you will find, if you look back and check, that within days of the referendum result, there were opinion polls saying people, yes, they wish to leave Europe, but they wish to remain in the single market. And I make that point because it just illustrates the complexity of the way in which people voted and the many reasons for which they voted. It wasn't as though this is such an enormously embracing question. It isn't one, actually, that is capable of a simple, straight yes and no answer that is absolutely and totally decisive. And you will know, I'm sure, if you talk to lots of people, as I'm sure you have, that people's views emerge, they change. I think it was David Davis who said, if you can't change your mind, you're not a democracy. And I rather agree with that proposition. And I think there is evidence that a number of people, a lot of people have changed their minds, as the emerging evidence is that the decision that we took on a sunny day in June 2016 is going to make a lot of people worse off. So I think that is a priority for Parliament, and we can't deny it. So, as I said earlier, we cannot deny that a majority of people voted for Brexit. But neither can those who voted for Brexit deny that 16 million people did not. And in a democracy, you cannot wholly overlook the views of 16 million people and go solely for the hardest of hard Brexits, which is what some people wish to prefer. I think that that would create an immense amount of subsequent division. And both sides are going to have to make compromises if we are to minimize that division in the future. And that was the point I was seeking to make earlier. I understand why people voted for Brexit. I understand that many of them had good reasons in their own mind for doing so. I don't decry any of that. I simply say the complexity of this is such that we need to look with very great care and try and reach a conclusion that will not be wholly satisfactory perhaps to anyone, but will be more satisfactory to most people than either a very hard Brexit or completely the reverse.
Right, we're drawing to a close. I want to thank audience members and members of the media for their questions. Just to say, we at the Federation, we are back on Brexit mode in 2 weeks' time, on the 15th of March. We have a half-day conference on Brexit with leading figures from all the creative industries, alongside ministers from leave.eu and all political parties speaking at that conference. That's for Fed members, but others too get involved. Before asking our colleague Paris just to conclude, I'd like to thank you, Sir John, not just for the very sage and very clear speech and for the way you tackled the questions, but for choosing to do it back when we started talking about this in the autumn, through and with the creative industries, along with our colleagues and friends at tech and at science and the knowledge economy, because this is the future of this country, and thank you for identifying that point. I'd like to thank Arabella and also John's team for working so closely with us. I'd like to thank Jonathan and Diana and all our great colleagues for hosting us so brilliantly here at Somerset House. I'd like to thank Russ and all his colleagues at Tech London Advocates as well. I'd like to thank our great Fed team in events policy and comms, particularly Sarah, Christian, Natasha, Hannah, and Sam. But before we close, just for a very quick minute, I would like to introduce to close proceedings Paris Petgrave, who is a tech entrepreneur and who is on the board of Tech London Advocates.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be brief, and thank you very much, Sir John. So we represent Tech London Advocates. We're a 5,500 strong community of digital entrepreneurs, investors, and people from the tech and creative sectors. And whilst the majority of us, the vast majority, voted to remain, we are fully committed to working towards ensuring that the tech and creative industries in the UK thrive post-Brexit. And we are fully endorsing and backing voices like Sir John's, because we understand and recognise how critical it is for the influence in the way that Brexit is done, so that we can safeguard the future growth and prosperity of the tech and creative industries in the UK. Thank you very much.